set to go. You can let people know who are still outside to come on back in. We'll get started here on our final session of the National Watchable Wildlife Conference. I'm Hank Fisher. I'm the Northern Rockies representative for Defenders of Wildlife, and I'm also a member of the steering committee who put the conference together. When we started planning this conference, we had a few goals that I think are really pretty modest. We wanted to get at least 300 people here. I think we've done that. We wanted to provide a real array of provocative speakers, and at least from the comments I'm hearing, I think we've done that too. And the final thing we wanted to do is we wanted to provide a forum for people who feel that watchable wildlife is an important new direction in conservation, a forum for people to get together and to provide some mutual reinforcement, to get some new ideas, and to take those ideas back home again. And I think we've been successful with that too. Okay, let's get to the real part of the conference, and what I wanted to do is to introduce our featured speaker for the conference, who is Mr. John Turner, who's the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And what I wanted to do first was to tell you a little bit about John. I think so you understand him a little bit better as a person, and maybe why you understand why he's come to this conference. John grew up in Wyoming, and his family business has always been involved with the outdoors. A dude ranching business, taking people on river trips, taking people on horseback trips, generally showing people how to have a good time in the outdoors. I guess as an editorial aside, I have to say that that's one of those things that instantly gives me a very positive impression, because I have some basic faith in people who spend a lot of time in the outdoors for doing the right thing. John received his master's degree from the University of Michigan in zoology. I should mention, it was told to me last night, he was also an active participant in the first Earth Day celebrations at Ann Arbor. He's conducted studies on eagles and osprey. He's even written a book on eagles. I guess that entitles him to the dubious title of being a wildlife biologist, which at least in this region can sometimes be not a title of respect. He served several terms in the Wyoming legislature, and there he earned a reputation as a conservation leader. And as a Republican, I have to say that that's not always common in the Wyoming legislature or the Montana legislature. No, that's an understatement. That's downright rare. And you may have seen John featured in the most recent Audubon magazine with an article entitled, "It's Not Easy Being Green." And I have to say, John, you looked awfully good in that article. They had a picture of him in a tuxedo next to the reflecting pool, and it was, I was quite taken by it. I thought I ought to describe for you at least the process of how John came to the conference. Our steering committee gave a lot of thought to who we wanted to have as our featured speakers. And to tell you the truth, John Turner was our first choice. The reason for that is, I should tell you, I have a bit of skepticism for these kind of fat agency documents, the long-term planning documents that seem to be the current rage for many of the agencies to be going through, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has been going through that process as well. And I was reading through their Fish and Wildlife Service Vision for the Future document, and to tell you the truth, I was impressed with it. I'm used to seeing a lot of hot air in those kind of documents, and the introduction to that document, which was written by John, was a piece that I think is really visionary, far-sighted, and something that we called John and asked him to share with you today. As you might expect, though, we have our own internal set of politics when we deal with things like inviting agency leaders for conferences, and it soon developed that people said, well, geez, if we have somebody from the Fish and Wildlife Service, we really need to have somebody from all the other agencies as well. And so we thought, well, maybe we should do that. And we did that. And so I guess I have to say the highest testament to John is that he came. And I really do think that that is a great credit. I have a quote from Machiavelli here. There is nothing more difficult to take in hand, nothing more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain of its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. Because the innovator has for enemies all those who have done well under the old order, and only half-hearted defenders in those who may do well under the new. I don't think we really have half-hearted defenders in this audience, but I'm sure that at future conferences, at our next Watchable Wildlife conferences, agency leaders will be clamoring to be on our program. But for today, we're pleased to have John Turner here to present his views on the conservation initiatives of the next century, Watchable Wildlife and Biodiversity.
Hank, thank you very much for that warm welcome. I'm excited about being here, and I'm impressed with the turnout. I'm impressed with the quality of the program. I congratulate all of you, especially you, Hank, and all of you who've given of yourself to just make this a marvelous proceedings. I can't tell you how nice it is to be in the West. I came in late last night to Helena and my good friend Dr. Jim Guest. This morning we drove down the Bitterroot, the Blackfoot River, and looked at some of the restoration plans, cooperative plans going on there. And there's something about fall in the Rocky Mountains with the Indian summer weather and the leaves changing and the elk starting to bugle in the high country. After you've been in Washington at home for a while, it's just good to be home. Here in Missoula country, which I kind of view as, well, this whole area is kind of like the foothills of my native state of Wyoming. But it definitely clears the mind and lifts the spirits. We need that kind of thing in Washington. I went to Washington with a great deal of suspicion and trepidation about being a part of the federal system. And now that I've been a part of it for 3 years, I can tell you all that it's worse than I'd feared. It is a frustrating place to work, to try to get new ideas launched, new programs. Trying to get a new idea started in Washington is kind of like taking a fire hydrant and sending it out into a pasture full of little puppies. Thousands of little puppies have to piddle on it before you can do anything. Watchable wildlife is certainly not a new idea, but in my opinion, and I know most of yours, it's a time that has definitely come. I guess I have been involved with it for years as a guide and outfitter in the outdoors, and I was pleased to at least to be a bystander and watch the state of Wyoming develop what I think is one of the finest programs in the country. Their Wildlife Worth the Watching program. I know you heard from Dave Laughlin and Dr. Doug Crow here, Assistant Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish, who provided a lot of the leadership. I'm very proud of that program. And I guess in some respects, we at the Fish and Wildlife Service have been involved for Watchable Wildlife inadvertently since 1903, when Teddy Roosevelt founded the first National Wildlife Refuge at Pelican Island in Florida. But there definitely has been a renewed interest in this whole outreach area, and there's a lot going on within the service. I think that's reflected by, I'm surprised, quite frankly, at the number of our employees that are here. And I would just like those that are with the Fish and Wildlife Service to just stand. Those that are here from around the country that have come from our hatcheries, our refuges, our field stations. I'm impressed with this group. I ask them to stand because in my quarter of a century now almost in public service, I've never encountered professional people that worked as hard or so dedicated to what they do on behalf of resources. We are expanding our commitment to Watchable Wildlife program. In fact, surprisingly, for the first time, you'll find money earmarked in our budget specifically for these programs. And we're spending it in a lot of ways. A good example of what we're doing is just a few miles outside of town here, and perhaps if you get on your field trip, you'll learn about it. In partnership with the U.S. Forest Service out at Lee Metcalf National Wildlife Refuge, we've set up what we call a Bitterroot Diversity Watchable Wildlife Triangle. And under that program, which includes teacher training and teacher guide, students visit 3 different types of habitat and learn about the wildlife dependent on each other. And then for the general public, I know at Lee Metcalf, they've recently built a viewing blind which has access to the handicap. And last year, I think we received over 50,000 visitors to the refuge. Another example that I'm proud of is that in my home near in Jackson Hole at the National Elk Refuge, we recently set up an observation post and some high-powered scopes at the local nursing center, which overlooks the refuge. So senior citizens year-round can look out at, depending on the time of year, elk, eagle, bison, bighorn sheep, coyotes, etc. It gives an opportunity for how watchable wildlife can be made available to people who otherwise may not have access. Another example of a program I visited was the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge in California, where the staff has set up a greenhouse and dioramas displaying different habitat types. They've restored the marsh, especially for viewing wildlife, improved the boardwalks, and built observation tower in rich riparian areas. And believe it or not, we're even finding a role for including fish in our Watchable Wildlife programs. Biologists at our Neosho National Fish Hatchery in Missouri recently found some endangered cave fish living in caves near the hatchery. They've hooked up a remote underwater camera that allows people to watch the cave fish from the Refuge Visitor Center. The cameras offer a unique opportunity for viewing that doesn't put the fish at risk. Last year we held a bald eagle observation weekend in Denver at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal that we're working to make a refuge. It was sub-zero and 10,000 people showed up to view eagles at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, so many that we had to turn several thousand away. Many of you, I hope, have seen that wonderful occurrence on the Platte River called Wings Over the Platte, where several 100,000 cranes come through. Some 100,000 visitors a year come and provide important input to the economy of that area. That idea got started with one of our biologists, endangered species biologists at a local enhancement station. So I submit to you these programs are not only for good for wildlife, they're certainly good for the economy of communities in our nation. They're important contributors to the jobs. According to some initial figures that we just released from our National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation, our figures show that in 1991, some 98 million adult Americans were involved with fish and wildlife resources. That contributed some $65 billion to the nation's economy on an annual basis. A breakdown of some of those figures, 35 million adult Americans participated in sport fishing, contributed some $25 billion. The nation's 14 million hunters spent about $12.3 billion. And the 76 million adult Americans who participated in non-consumptive activities related to wildlife pumped another $18 billion into the nation's economy. All told, spending on wildlife activities accounted for approximately 1% of the gross national product, which translates into hundreds of thousands of jobs for this country. So no longer, in my opinion, is watchable wildlife a side benefit of our conservation program. Rather, we're beginning to recognize it as one of the pillars that will hold up conservation into the next century and beyond. However, in my opinion, for this pillar of watchable wildlife to prosper in the decades to come, Our basic commitment to the foundation of conservation must continue with more diligence than perhaps any time in our history. Simply stated, the protection of wildlife and the protection and the enhancement of habitat and systems on which they depend is paramount. We can promote the product, but only if at the same time we protect the product. In wildlife conservation, and looking back, I believe we as a nation can be very proud of where we have come in our history. It was this society, the United States of America, that really invented the visionary concept of setting aside and protecting wild lands and wild resources for their own intrinsic value and for the enjoyment of all our citizens. This national invention, of course, started just to our south with Yellowstone. Then we as a country created the world's first national forest, wilderness areas, monuments, scenic rivers, etc. Our incredible National Wildlife Refuge System now encompasses nearly 91 million acres, unparalleled as a system anywhere in the globe. Subsequently, we led other societies in passing comprehensive laws to conserve and scientifically manage wildlife and aggressively protect endangered species. We did something else unique as a nation. We made these wild resources available not just to the wealthy and the privileged, but for the utilization and enjoyment of all our citizens. The legacy of forward-looking programs is impressive, in my opinion. When our wildlife resources were in trouble early in this century, we responded with strong action. Pittman Robinson and Dingle Johnson excise tax on hunting and fishing equipment, for example, have proven to be among the most successful wildlife programs ever, pumping billions of dollars into state conservation projects and helping to bring back, stabilize, and enhance not just game species, but a diversity of wildlife complexes. I think it's important in all this dialogue to remember that it's the sportsmen of this country, through license fees, excise taxes, and even sizable contribution, that's still the backbone of funding for this nation's conservation effort. Today, the conservation challenges we face, in my opinion, are even more complex, from the loss of the nation's wetlands to the growing number of species that require endangered species protection. Again, I believe at the Fish and Wildlife Service we are responding with innovative and aggressive solutions, incidentally with very strong support from this President and this administration. Our resource operational dollars from the President for the Fish and Wildlife Service have increased 98% in the last four fiscal years. In habitat preservation, this administration has supported a period of expansion of national wildlife refuges more dynamic even than the two-term administration of that great conservation President Teddy Roosevelt. Through 1992, I'm proud to say we will have created 57 new national wildlife refuges and expanded the system by more than 750,000 acres. There simply have not been a record of achievement equal to that any time in our history. I'm proud of it. I'm also proud of the unprecedented progress we have made in wetland protection. While I have been back there, I've been pleased to be part of programs just in the Fish and Wildlife Service that has restored, enhanced, or protected over 2 million acres of wetlands, restored, protected, or enhanced over 2 million acres of wetlands for this country. I was just looking at our figures for 1991 and programs we have in the service. We've protected, restored, or enhanced 650,000 acres of wetlands in this country. It's the most positive wetland record any time in our history. As most of you, I think, are aware, we launched the North American Waterfowl Management Plan just a few years ago, financially fueled by the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, passed by bipartisan support in the Congress and signed by the President in 1990. This historic cooperative effort by the United States, Canada, and Mexico coordinates wetland protection and promotes joint ventures to conserve wetlands in vital areas of the North America, including here in Montana. This program, along with companion efforts, have the potential, and I'm seeing it, of changing the face of American agriculture in North America for the benefit of wildlife, to me, for decades to come. In the past 3 years, well over 1 million acres of wetlands have been protected, enhanced, or restored under the North American Plan. If funded adequately by Congress, and I say if, this promises to continue to be the most exciting habitat conservation plan for biodiversity in the history of our continent. In another area on the wetland front, I'm proud of a recent program we launched called Partners in Wildlife, where we are now working with thousands of farmers and ranchers to restore wetlands on private lands under this program called Partners for Wildlife. During the past 3 years, in fact, we have signed up over 8,000 landowners in this country who have joined us in the service to restore wetlands. Some 175,000 acres of wetland we've restored in the last 3 years at some 12,000 sites. Recently, I visited projects in North Dakota, projects in Pennsylvania, met with landowners, and to see the watchable wildlife, the non-game, the biodiversity values that we're getting at very few dollars is really exciting. So I'm pleased that many of these important new initiatives to give long-term protection to habitat. They are positive and incorporate thousands of willing partners across the nation. And again, I'm pleased that the President has given us unprecedented budget support for these programs. Our wetland funding has increased 156% since 1989. Currently at the Fish and Wildlife Service, it's $172 million going to wetlands. However, I must confess I am saddened that this session of the Congress has proposed significant cuts in the President's budget for the 1993 and some of our most important resource programs. Both in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate have made severe reductions in our requests for some of the following national resource programs: coastal programs to protect living resources, severe cuts in our endangered species program, cuts in our stewardship on national wildlife refuge, cuts in our plan for acquisition of new units, cuts in our challenge grant program for watchable wildlife, and cuts in our private lands Partners for Wildlife programs to build positive relationships with the nation's landowners. Perhaps I could understand and accept some of these actions if these reductions were actually going to help a serious province of the federal deficit. But in reality, when you look at the budgets, hundreds of millions of dollars were actually added to Interior's budget. Much of it, you will find, is going to fund special interest projects in congressional districts. Good old-fashioned pork. The Fish and Wildlife Service is receiving unneeded fish hatcheries, additions to local zoos, low-priority construction projects, low-priority acquisition, and studies should not take priority over the vital natural resources programs that this country needs. I am personally dismayed that the conservation community has tolerated this irresponsible behavior by the United States Congress. Perhaps we should take a chapter from Mr. Proxmire's old award program, and the conservation community should start awarding something like rubber ducky awards for this kind of behavior. I could say more about that, but that is indeed enough. Another example of the difficult conservation programs we face today is the sharp decline in the population of many species of neotropical birds. More than one-half of all the bird species who breed in the United States migrate south to Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, and South America for the winter. Long-term surveys indicate that many of these species are in rapid decline. In the eastern United States, the population of 70% of the neotropical migrants monitored by our breeding bird survey dropped over the last decade. For example, the cerulean warbler has declined at an average rate of over 3% per year for the past 25 years. Olive-sided flycatchers have declined nearly 4% a year. Yellow-billed cuckoos 1.5% per year over the past 25. In response to the decline of neotropical migrants on a species-by-species basis indeed seems impractical. Instead, we have to strike at the root cause of declining bird populations, the deterioration of their habitat, both in the North American breeding grounds and the Latin America wintering grounds. To do this, we established a new program called Partners in Flight. It is the first comprehensive non-game bird conservation program since the passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, some 75 years ago. We have received critical support for this monitoring and public education program from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and the program itself will eventually involve the partnership of 13 federal agencies and 19 conservation groups and trade associations. Now, some might ask, what does this have to do with Watchable Wildlife? And the answer is obvious. The strategy of the Watchable Wildlife Program must be to help maintain viable populations of all native fish and wildlife species by building an effective, well-informed constituency for conservation. As we look to the 21st century, we are increasingly focusing on, as we should be, maintaining this biodiversity in our nation's ecosystems. This will require us to manage ecosystems as a whole rather than managing wildlife on a species-by-species basis. I think we are making significant strides in the objectives of protecting biodiversity. For example, the service is now implementing an exciting new program called gap analysis to help preserve areas with high levels of biodiversity, which will be incredibly useful to land and wildlife managers at all levels. Essentially, what we do is use computers to match biological and graph data and geographic data to produce maps that show us where the hot spots for wildlife biodiversity exist. That is, areas of land where there is great diversity of species, so that we and other federal agencies, the state, and even local government and private landowners can focus their resources in those areas. What we're finding in a lot of cases is that the most biological diverse areas are not in wildlife refuges, are not in wilderness areas or parks, but are outside of currently protected lands. By the end of this year, gap analysis will be underway in more than 20 states, encompassing nearly half the land in the continental United States. I don't think I would risk overstatement to say that gap analysis should be one of the most promising tools yet for protecting and enhancing biodiversity for our future. It is this kind of creative thinking we need to strive for, a way to get out ahead of the curve. At the service, we're also providing initial financial and technical support for an innovative regional ecosystem management plan for out here in this part of the country, along what is currently the Central Flyway, called the Great Plains Initiative, in cooperation with the Western Governors Association. Essentially, this effort will pave the way for states, Canada, and Mexico to work together to take a proactive, ecosystem-wide approach to managing wildlife and its habitat, and not just focus on individual species of a limited area within jurisdictional political boundaries. It offers states and provinces an opportunity to contribute to vital projects outside their borders, with initial focus centered on, but not limited to, migratory bird species. But gap analysis and the Great Plains Initiative should only be foundations for future biodiversity projects in the decades to come. These kinds of programs should join ongoing efforts that we already have, like endangered species, contaminants, fisheries, coastal program, Great Lakes programs, big rivers programs, etc. It is my belief that if we are to succeed in protecting biodiversity, we simply must have the full support of the American people. I don't believe that support is by any means guaranteed into our future. It is obvious that we live in an increasingly urban culture, and many people, especially our young, have lost touch with the land and the outdoors. They do not have the same feel for nature and the great outdoors that their parents and grandparents perhaps had. This loss of touch with the land has its risks. History has proven over and over again that ignorance and apathy are breeding grounds for oversimplified solutions and extremism. I personally believe that the current anti-hunting movement is a perfect example of this kind of extremism. A relatively small number of extremists are ignoring, in my opinion, good science and the real needs of conservation, and are seeking to exploit the ignorance of the public about hunting to get hunting banned. The truth, of course, is that hunters have been and continue to be the nation's most ardent conservationists, willingly spending billions of dollars in license, taxes, fees, and stamps to support wildlife and wildlife resources. A traditional and appropriate utilization of wildlife resources under sound game management, it is a needed wildlife management tool. Wouldn't it be far better if instead of spending all this effort and time and money beating up on each other, we all work together for the conservation and enjoyment of our natural resources in ways that mattered and produced long-term results? It's not that Americans don't care for the land. A recent Times Mirror Roper survey taken during the dark days, I think in March, when some of the economic news was the most depressing, it showed that 81% of Americans were either active environmentalists or sympathetic to environmental concerns. It's just that Americans are increasingly out of touch with the land, and it's my belief this is where Watchable Wildlife stands to make a big difference. By getting people back in touch with nature, first of all, second of all, creating a strong awareness, third, helping them understand the complex needs of wildlife, and fourth, generating support for creative new approaches to managing wildlife and wildlife resources. In my view, in fact, biodiversity and watchable wildlife will be two of the vital pillars of conservation into the 21st century. And both these are rooted in one fundamental truth, that a nation that knows and loves the land will indeed take care of the land. We simply can no longer separate our scientific management goals from our educational goals. If we fail in one area, we are certain to fail in the other. Success in conserving and enhancing biodiversity will not happen if we don't have the support of the American people. Watchable wildlife will not succeed if we don't have the diversity of species for people to watch. In closing, I want to reach back 2 centuries to quote Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said, "Nature never deceives us. It is always we who deceive ourselves." I think the danger we face today is we will deceive ourselves into believing that business as usual is sufficient to meet the nation's increasing difficult and complex conservation challenges. We simply cannot be tied to the old ways of doing things. We must be innovative. We cannot be solely reactive and wait for crisis to occur before we take action. Those of us in the resources business must be forward-looking. We cannot sit back and wait for people to come to us. We must reach out to the American public. Just one final project as an example of this kind of promise that we can build on together. Recently, in Cook County, Illinois, at the Cook County Forest Preserve, we found about a project where they wanted to build a 40 to 60 acre fishing lake in an urban area of Chicago. Our biologists determined they could alter the project slightly to create 60 to 80 acres of additional wetlands, restore a considerable amount of wildlife habitat, and build a major wildlife outreach program. So they have formed a partnership with the county, the people of Chicago, the state, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to raise $3.5 million to complete the project over the next 2 years. What I like about this partnership project is it bridges the gap between conservation, watchable wildlife, and some fun recreational uses. Not only are we going to get 60 to 80 acres of wetlands restored, but we are also getting a beautiful place where the people of Chicago can go and see ducks, geese, migrating birds, and other wildlife, and even throw a line, hopefully, and catch a fish. In addition, it shows that conservation is not something only happening way out in the wilds of the American West, but it can take place in their own backyards. The project has the incredible potential for educational outreach. I can easily envision a day when thousands of school children from inner city Chicago will visit the newly created wetland and discover the joy and peace of coming into contact with wildlife. And more important, they will learn the value of keeping wild places wild. To me, this is the essence of Watchable Wildlife, nurturing the love and respect for the outdoors that are such an important part of our national heritage. I believe this conference is an important step in ensuring the future growth of Watchable Wildlife. And I am delighted to see so many of you here, and I salute you accordingly. Together, all of us, we can ensure Watchable Wildlife does indeed stand as a pillar supporting our nation's conservation movement in the coming decades as we look to the 21st century. Thank you very much. God bless all of you, and God bless our critters.
Our next speaker is Phil Tawney, and Phil is appearing on behalf of his client, Peter Bush, who had some urgent family matters and could not attend. Phil is the senior partner of the law firm Tawney and Dayton. It's here in Missoula, and they've been active in conservation now for many years. Phil was a lobbyist in the Montana legislature for many years. He was a field representative for the Wilderness Society, and he has served as executive director of the Montana Democratic Party. Those are just kind of the facts on Phil, though. I mean, if you really want to know Phil, if there's something involved with conservation in the state of Montana, Phil's involved with it, and he's probably started it. So, Phil Tawney.
Well, thank you, Hank. It's an honor for Peter Bush to be invited here. I pass on his regrets. If I say something that you don't like, it's my fault. If I say something that you do like, why don't you compliment him? That's the easiest way I think I can protect the relationship that I have with Peter Bush. He is truly committed to the resource issue in Montana and other places in the country through some of the business interests that he's involved with. And it's an honor for me to appear on his behalf today. As part of this presentation, we want to show a small portion of film that has been produced by Bush Wildlife Productions. Matt Reed, who is an associate of that enterprise, is going to show that film and narrate a small portion, and then I'm going to make a presentation. So with your brief break here and giving us a space to get this going, that's what we're going to do.
Will I be able to see on?
You got a light right here.
Doesn't work.
Well, that may be a problem.
Yeah, if there would be a flashlight, that would be good. For those of you who aren't aware, I work with Peter Bush. I'm on a film production that we're working on right now on the Great Bears of North America, and I do the research and locational work, finding, scouting areas, and doing a lot of the planning for this particular film. But this is a film that Peter is really excited about. Most of you will see it on television in about a year, and for those of you who have come all the way to Missoula and are not going to have the wonderful pleasure of going on some of these field trips or getting out on your own in this beautiful Indian summer with a little bit of rain thrown in, this will be a good opportunity for you to see some of the wonderful wildlife, in particular associated with grizzly bears, in Montana, and just for John Turner's sake, also in Wyoming. And so I'm going to let these people over here roll them, and I'm going to narrate. So.
Just people stand, the image is not full screen.
Some real exciting stuff. Even for those of us living in the Rocky Mountain West, the opportunity to observe the grizzly bear engage in the routines of daily existence can hardly be taken for granted. For those living outside the region, the chances of ever seeing a grizz, not to mention observing it engaged in some behavior besides traveling from point A to point B, is even more limited, perhaps non-existent. In an effort to make the most spectacular viewing opportunities accessible to everyone, Peter has formed Bush Productions, a natural history film documentary company. He, myself have joined with Ray Ponovich, Greg Hood, and Bart Reddy of Bozeman's Natural Image Films to produce true-to-life documentaries that allow viewers the chance to be unobtrusive witnesses to animals engaged in completely natural behaviors that the audience might otherwise never have the opportunity to observe. Bush Productions' current project on the great bears of North America offers some glaring examples of how a commitment to spending the time necessary to let the animals tell their own story can reap results that could never be staged or manipulated. But it is not enough to simply offer a continuous stream of spectacular footage, no matter how unique it might be. Educating viewers seems more than just providing them with a series of pretty pictures. Bush Productions is an adamant in its belief that a film about bears, for example, must be more than just a once-in-a-lifetime wildlife viewing opportunity for that family that has never wandered more than a few miles away from downtown Cleveland. The production must also serve as the field guide that accompanies them on their trip, the resource material that puts the animal and the behavior into the context of its total environment. It must go beyond the obvious fact that the bear is feeding on a carcass. It must go on to explain where the carcass came from, how the bear utilizes the bounty, how and why it defends its cache and from whom. It must detail the not-so-obvious social interactions and the cub-rearing behaviors that are also taking place so that the viewer comes a step or two closer to a more comprehensive understanding of the intricacies of day-to-day survival in the life of the grizzly. The foundation of Bush Productions' goal to bring viewers the truest possible picture of life in the wild lies in the willingness of the film crew to virtually live in the backcountry, making themselves available for whatever nature might offer up. This style of labor-intensive filmmaking, which is virtually unheard of in an industry that so often relies on trained or captive animals to meet arbitrary production deadlines, offers various rewards. It can mean spending countless hours seeing nothing. It can mean capturing an unpredictable, though seldom seen behavior. And occasionally it can mean documenting the unbelievable. Last month, having spent several days watching the interactions of as many as 8 different grizzlies at a bison carcass site, the scene suddenly went from the spectacular to the unbelievable. The Bush Productions crew obtained the first documented proof of the existence of a wolf in Yellowstone in over 50 years. Successful wildlife viewing is never an easy task. It is most often comprised of a delicate combination of desire, devotion, and being in the right place at the right time. No individual and no film crew can ever hope to be in all of the right places at all of the right times. Nevertheless, having made the decision to produce the most true-to-life wildlife films possible, we have also made the decision to devote our fullest energies and resources towards achieving that goal. Bush Productions is committed to letting all people share in the joys of watching wildlife in their natural habitat, and only through the strongest of commitments can viewers come to expect images such as these. What's that? Thank you.
Powerful wildlife footage by Bush Productions, a new company committed to ensuring that wildlife captured in these films does not become an example of the way it used to be. The key issue for business and the idea of this talk is whether the animal you saw was a wolf. It's not whether the animal you saw was a wolf. The question is whether high-quality habitat capable of supporting wolves will endure long enough to permit the political process to catch up with the wild wolf. Wolves will return to Yellowstone as sure as we are sitting here today if the habitat is protected. As you may know, wolves have not been documented in Yellowstone since 1926. Who knows, if you take away the political heat, they may find their way back by themselves. 2 years ago, while trying to ambush an elk with a brother and a mutual friend, we witnessed 2 wolves traversing a high mountain basin in the Fish Creek drainage within 50 miles of this hotel. It was an experience I will never forget. 2 adult wolves traversing a high mountain area full of snow, which we couldn't walk on, in the speed and grace that I'll never forget. Peter Bush's film has a commercial side, but at the same time will attempt to convey a conservation message and to help ensure that bears, other wildlife, and their habitat will be protected. To the topic of this speech, conservation responsibility of business towards watchable wildlife. As clearly as we can state it, business's role should be protecting habitat, and the economic benefits will follow. Peter Bush has taken an active role in protecting habitat in Montana and in Florida, where his businesses, including Southern Eagle Distributing, are located. As the son of brewing magnate August Bush Jr., Peter Bush has made a strong commitment to protecting watchable wildlife. His conservation ethic comes from years of learning about conservation and the environment from his father and his keen interest in wildlife throughout his life. Peter Bush started with the idea that we need more habitat as a whole without any interest for enhancing his business interests. Anheuser-Busch has demonstrated that through organizations like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, there can be direct economic benefits. As an example, Anheuser-Busch made a $500,000 contribution in 1989 to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, creating the North American Habitat Fund. This fund is then replenished when the property is resold to the state or federal government to a private conservation buyer. This single business contribution has allowed the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation to participate and complete numerous habitat projects throughout the western United States. The donation from Anheuser-Busch has given the Elk Foundation the financial base to lead the effort in acquiring some $10 million of real estate along the northern boundary of Yellowstone National Park near Gardner, Montana. By purchasing and reselling the property to the state and federal governments, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation has helped to preserve outstanding elk habitat that will be protected forever. Protecting the northern Yellowstone elk herd's key winter range and migratory corridors also provides habitat for grizzly bears, potential wolf recovery, and other wildlife. Beer drinking conservationists have switched brands because of Anheuser-Busch's commitment to the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation to protect wildlife habitat. Elk hunters and conservationists across the country, and this is a true statement, have no problem voicing the statement, "This bud's for you." It is clear to me that landowners and companies in Montana who are doing something about habitat protection and wildlife enhancement are increasing their long-term net worth. Landowners who are taking care of their property and protecting the habitat are the ones that are getting the highest resale value. It is no secret why people are moving to Montana. It's a great place to live, work, and recreate. God's creations attract millions of visitors each and every year. Peter Bush and I believe that business can participate in protecting habitat and watchable wildlife in the theme of their business programs. Those that do are going to prosper. Statistics underscore the strength of this theory, and you've heard all those statistics, and I'm not going to repeat them this morning. Again, let me return to the theme of this speech, conservation responsibility of business towards watchable wildlife. Some would say it's an oxymoron to ask how watchable wildlife benefits from the business community. Some would say that business is destroying wildlife and its habitat. Our economic system provides the necessary capital and initiative to protect habitat, and at the same time, it is the force of its destruction. We all believe that public and private lands must be protected. The government can't, shouldn't, and won't control or purchase enough habitat to do what you and I would like to see happen. Through the use of innovative estate planning, conservation easements, and tax planning, the private landowner should and must and will play a major role. The role of private landowners and their property rights are not being given the priority they deserve in this watchable wildlife theme. My opinion. I don't discount the importance of government and the work of people like John Turner and the public service that they are providing, but the real source of major new accomplishments, and John Turner mentioned this, is with the private landowner. Through our legal system, our country acknowledges the right of Americans to enjoy wildlife as a free resource because it belongs to all of us. We must not forget the significance of this principle. Teddy Roosevelt writes about conservation in 1905 when he wrote, "Above all, we should realize that the effort towards this end is essentially a democratic movement. It is our power to preserve large tracts of wilderness and to preserve game for all lovers of nature and to give reasonable opportunities for the exercise of the skill of the hunter, whether he is or is not a man of means. The key is the participation and commitment by all people, no matter what the size of their financial ability." The history of the American conservation movement was founded with people like Roosevelt, Muir, Pinchot, Marshall, Leopold. They created visions that led to the protection of land and the restoration of fish and wildlife. These individuals did not become involved to enhance their business interests. They did it because of their commitment to habitat and wildlife through a democratic process that allowed all Americans to capture that vision that they helped articulate. We are here today to deal with the abundance of wildlife resulting from the cumulative impact of these leaders and the persistence of the rank-and-file conservationists for almost 3 generations. It is the success of American conservation that brings us to this conference today and to the beginning of a new vision of watchable wildlife. How do we share the products of our success equitably? How do we take this tremendous fish and wildlife resource that has become a powerful commercial catalyst and a commodity in our contemporary Western economy and share it with the American people without destroying the very value of the resource we are trying to protect? Speaking on behalf of Peter Bush, I caution you about over-promoting watchable wildlife. Peter Bush comes from a major American enterprise which has contributed significantly to wildlife and habitat protection. All of us involved in the issue of resource protection allocation must carefully consider private business's role. Anheuser-Busch Corporation has a proud record of excellence in conservation. What is the best way for business to participate? We do not want to commercialize the wildlife resource to the point where it is no longer viable as a resource that we all cherish. We need to move forward in habitat and wildlife protection, as John Turner was describing the programs. How do we do that? There are new and innovative ways to involve business and the business community in the idea of this watchable wildlife theme. That's the task, that's the challenge. And we need people like you to help the conservation movement stay alive. Thank you very much.